Welcome, my friends. I'm so grateful you chose to spend these minutes with me on Storyline English. Think back to a time when everything felt uncertain, when you did not know what tomorrow would bring, when the road ahead was dark and you were not sure you could continue. Most of us know this feeling. It visits us all at some point in our lives. Now imagine feeling this way not just for one day or 1 week, but for years. Imagine carrying the weight of an entire nation on your shoulders while standing in snow with no shoes and very little food. This is not a story from a movie. This is the true story of a real man. A man who was afraid, who made mistakes, who lost battles, and who almost gave up. But he did not give up. And because of that, a new country was born. Today, on Storyline English, we begin a journey together. A long, quiet, and powerful journey into the real life of George Washington. Not the perfect man you read about in books. The real man. The human man. So find a comfortable place, take a slow breath, and let the story begin. The year was 1732. The place was a land called Virginia, on the eastern coast of North America. At that time, Virginia was not a free country. It was a colony. That means it belonged to a powerful king far away across the ocean. That king was the King of England. The people who lived in Virginia had to follow his rules, pay his taxes, and obey his laws, even if they did not agree with them. It was into this world that a boy was born on the 22nd of February. His name was George Washington. His family was not poor, but they were not the richest family either. They had land, and land was very important in those days. George's father, Augustine Washington, worked hard to build a good life for his family. They lived near a river called the Rappahannock, and young George grew up watching the water move slowly past the green fields. Life seemed simple and quiet in those early years. But life has a way of changing when we least expect it. And for young George, that change came very early, and it came with great pain. So, who exactly was this boy? And what would shape the man he became? The answer begins with loss. George Washington was only 11 years old when his father died. This was a moment that changed everything. In those times, when a father died, the oldest son received most of the family's land and money. George was not the oldest son. His older half-brothers, Lawrence and Augustine, received more. George received some land, but not enough to build the life he dreamed of. Without his father, George had to grow up fast. He did not go to a fine school in England like some boys from wealthy families did. He learned at home, from local teachers and from his own reading. He studied mathematics, he practiced writing, and he learned how to measure land. This skill, called surveying, would later become very important for him. But even as a young boy, people noticed something special about George. He was tall for his age. He was serious and quiet. He listened more than he spoke, and he worked very hard at everything he tried to do. His older brother Lawrence became like a second father to him. Lawrence had served in the military, and he told George stories of soldiers and battles and honor. These stories planted something deep inside the young boy's heart. A quiet dream. A question that George carried with him every day. Could he, a boy without a university education, without great wealth, one day becomes something more? George Washington was 21 years old when he first went to war. It was the year 1753, and the trouble was in a place called the Ohio Valley. England and France both wanted this land. Both countries sent soldiers, and the young colony of Virginia sent George Washington. He was chosen to carry an important message to the French soldiers, telling them to leave the land. It was a dangerous journey through cold forests and across frozen rivers. George nearly drowned crossing one of those rivers. He almost froze to death in the snow. But he completed his mission. He delivered the message. The French refused to leave, and so the fighting began. George Washington led soldiers into battle for the first time in 1754. It did not go well. His small group of men fought a larger French force, and they were surrounded. George had to surrender. It was his first real defeat. But something important happened in that moment of failure. George did not run from it. He studied it. He thought carefully about what went wrong. He learned. This is one of the most important lessons of his life, and perhaps one of the most important lessons for all of us on this English learning journey. Failure is not the end of the story. It is often where the real story begins. And for George Washington, the story was only just beginning. Between the early battles and the Great War that would change history, George Washington lived a quieter chapter of his life. He returned to his land in Virginia. He managed his farm, called Mount Vernon, with great care and attention. He married a woman named Martha Dandridge Custis in 1759. Martha was a widow, meaning her first husband had died. She had 2 young children, and George raised them as his own. People who knew George in these years described him as a careful and patient man. He rose early every morning. He worked long hours. He kept detailed records of everything on his farm. He was also a man who enjoyed simple pleasures. He liked to ride horses. He enjoyed dancing at local gatherings. He was known for his calm presence in a room. But beneath this quiet life, something was growing. The people of Virginia trusted George Washington. They elected him to serve in their local government, and as the years passed, more and more people in the American colonies began to feel something uncomfortable. A feeling of unfairness. A feeling that the King of England was asking too much from them. Asking them to pay heavy taxes. Asking them to follow rules made by people far away who did not understand their lives. This feeling was slowly, quietly, becoming something much larger. And George Washington could feel it too. By 1775, the American colonies were on the edge of open war with England. Meetings were held, voices grew louder, and the men who led the colonies had to make a decision. They needed someone to lead their army, someone the people trusted, someone who was calm under pressure, someone who could hold an army together even in the darkest moments. They chose George Washington. He accepted, but not with excitement. He accepted with quiet seriousness. He told the other leaders that he did not know if he was truly ready for this responsibility. He said he hoped he had the skills required, but he was not certain. This honesty was itself a kind of strength. And so, in June of 1775, George Washington became the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. His soldiers were not professional fighters. Many of them were farmers, tradesmen, and young men with almost no training. They had very few weapons, very little food, and almost no money. England, on the other side, had one of the most powerful armies in the world. The situation looked impossible. And yet, George Washington walked into that impossibility with steady steps. What came next was not a story of easy victory. It was a story of survival, of suffering, and of a kind of courage that most of us will never be asked to show. The winter of 1777 to 1778 was one of the most difficult times in George Washington's life. His army was camped at a place called Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. The weather was brutal. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. The soldiers had very little food. Many had no proper shoes, and they walked through snow and ice with bare or wrapped feet. Thousands of men became sick. Hundreds died. Washington walked among his soldiers every day. He saw their suffering with his own eyes. He wrote letters to the government asking for supplies, for food, for clothing. He begged, he argued, he warned that the army would fall apart if nothing changed. And through all of this, he stayed. He did not leave. He did not give up. He chose to suffer alongside his men. There is a famous image of George Washington kneeling in the snow at Valley Forge, praying quietly. Whether that exact moment happened exactly that way, no one can say for certain. But what is certain is this: Washington carried the weight of that winter inside him. And when spring came and the army survived, something had changed. The soldiers who made it through Valley Forge were stronger. They were more united. They believed in a new and deeper way that they could win. Valley Forge was not a battle, but it may have been the moment where the war was truly decided. The American Revolutionary War lasted 8 long years, from 1775 to 1783. During that time, George Washington lost many battles. He retreated more than he attacked. There were moments when the situation seemed completely hopeless. Soldiers left the army, supplies ran out. Some of Washington's own officers doubted him. But Washington understood something important. He did not need to destroy the British army completely. He only needed to keep his own army alive long enough for England to grow tired of the war. It was a strategy of patience and survival. And slowly, it began to work. Help came from an unexpected place. France, the old enemy from Washington's early battles, became America's ally. French soldiers and French ships joined the fight. And in 1781, at a place called Yorktown in Virginia, the British Army was surrounded. Their commander, Lord Cornwallis, surrendered. It was the final major battle of the war. When the news spread, people celebrated in the streets, and George Washington, now 50 years old, stood quietly in the midst of it all. He had done what most people thought was impossible. He had led a small, poor, and untrained army against one of the greatest military powers in the world. And he had guided it, slowly and painfully, to victory. But the story was not yet finished. After the war ended, something remarkable happened. Something that the world had almost never seen before. George Washington gave up his power. He could have become a king. Many people wanted him to be king. His soldiers loved him. The people trusted him. He had the army behind him. In almost every other country in history, a man in that position would have taken the throne. But Washington refused. In December of 1783, he returned his military commission to the Congress. He thanked his officers, he said goodbye to his soldiers, and then he went home to Mount Vernon. Just like that. A man who could have ruled a nation chose instead to return to his farm. This act shocked the world. King George III of England, when he heard about it, reportedly said that if Washington truly gave up his power, he was the greatest man in the world. But the story continued. The new country needed a leader, a president, and once again, the people turned to George Washington. In 1789, he was elected as the first president of the United States of America. He did not want the job, but he accepted it. Because for Washington, duty was always more important than personal desire. George Washington served 2 terms as president, from 1789 to 1797. He helped build the government of a country that had never existed before. He made decisions that shaped American law, the economy, and foreign policy for generations to come. He chose not to serve a 3rd term, setting a tradition that American presidents followed for over 150 years. But the full story of George Washington must also include the difficult parts. Washington owned enslaved people. This is a historical fact and a painful one. At the time of his death, more than 300 enslaved people lived and worked on his land. He knew, in some part of himself, that this was wrong. He struggled with it privately, and in his will, he made an unusual decision for that time. He ordered that the enslaved people he personally owned should be freed after his wife Martha's death. It was a small and incomplete step, but it was a step that many other men of his time and wealth did not take. We remember George Washington as a great man, and he was great in many ways. But he was also a man of his time, with the limits and failures that all human beings carry. Understanding this does not make his achievements smaller. It makes his story more honest. And honest stories are the ones that truly teach us something. George Washington died on December the 14th, 1799. He was 67 years old. In his final days, he was sick with a throat infection. He faced death the same way he faced everything in his life, quietly, calmly, and without complaint. When the news spread across America and around the world, people mourned deeply. The man who had led an army through impossible winters, who had refused a crown, who had helped build a new kind of government, was gone. But what he left behind was not only a country. He left behind something harder to see, but just as real. He left behind a way of living. A belief that ordinary people, imperfect and uncertain, can do extraordinary things if they show up every day, if they keep going when the road is hard, if they choose duty over comfort and patience over pride. And for you, my friend, listening to this story today, there is a message here that goes beyond history. You are on a journey too. Learning English is not easy. Some days the words are difficult. Some days you feel like you are standing in the snow with no shoes. But you keep going. You keep listening. You keep learning. And that, in its own quiet way, is exactly the kind of courage that Washington showed. Thank you for walking through this story with me today on Storyline English. If this journey touched something in you, I invite you to share it with a friend who is also learning English. Leave a comment and tell me which part of Washington's story stayed with you the most. And come back for our next story, because the journey of discovery continues, and I will be here, waiting for you.